Good evening and a very warm welcome. I would say it's a bit of a mixed emotion that I welcome you to this COVID-19 briefing. I would very much have liked to welcome you in person, but of course under the current way that we're living, via the video link is the way we have to go. And certainly it's something which, as a charity, we're very conscious to try and keep in touch, make sure we can help as much as we can, and tell you a little bit about the work we're doing. Tonight's an opportunity for us to explain how Jami has reacted to the COVID-19 and how we hope to go forward beyond it. Tonight's also an opportunity, it's the first opportunity for me to have seen any of the team in person, and you'll forgive me a moment if I just use it to say a big thank you. Thank you to Laurie, to Louise, and to all of the team who have done an outstanding job. The word unprecedented is being used a lot at the moment, but we really are in unprecedented times. There is no precedent for a worldwide pandemic and the world shutting down. And the fact, Laurie, that you, Louise, and all the team have been able to keep going, making sure that Jami is there to support the community, it is a true testament to you and all the work we've done, and I am very grateful indeed. Tonight's also an opportunity to hear from you. And if you want to ask a question, if you're watching via Zoom, please put a message in the chat box to the moderator. And if you're watching by Facebook Live, you can type in the comments and we'll deal with some questions later. What you're going to hear about tonight is the work not just of our team here, but of many hundreds of volunteers who have supported Jami. To them and to those watching, thank you. To our supporters for continuing to support us during these difficult times, thank you to you. To tell us in a bit more detail what has been going on, gives me great pleasure now to hand over to our Director of Services, Louise.
Hello, I'm Louise Kermode, Head of Services at Jami. I'd like to share with you some of the ways in which we've adapted our services during COVID-19. So one of the first things that we did when we had to close the door of our hubs was to make sure that our most vulnerable service users were supported. We started delivering meals to people. For many that attend our hubs, having a hot meal is a really important part of coming to the hub. But for others, it's the only means of social connection. So the doorstep chat that accompanies that meal delivery is as important, if not more important, to some people. It's also been a way of us being able to monitor and support people who are the most isolated of the community by being able to raise issues and concerns to the professional team, who've then been able to provide further intervention or link in with statutory services also. We also made sure that anyone that we normally have face-to-face contact with had telephone support instead. So I think when we've compared the telephone support that we're providing currently to the one-to-one face-to-face support that we were providing before, we've seen a 55% increase in hours of support being delivered and a 29% increase in the amount of people that we're supporting. So it just gives you an idea of the scale of support that we're providing by phone. We also made sure that people who needed had tablets or devices and IT support, technical support to connect to not just us, but also to each other and also to the other online resources that are being made available during this pandemic. So we were able to use redeployed staff from social enterprise to provide some of that technical support to get people connected and make sure that they were able to connect to their loved ones as well. So all of the groups and activities that we would normally be running in our buildings, in our hubs, are now online. A really nice part of this has been able to see people connecting from across our different hubs that wouldn't normally be able to connect with each other. We have also run a virtual Seder online as part of our hub programme. Following the initial crisis response, we started to focus on our one-to-one recovery focus work as well. So we are now carrying out our assessments, our IROC assessment online with people using video conferencing. Occupational therapists and social workers are continuing their work via video conferencing and phone. And our fitness coordinator has from day one been using video conferencing to get people active in their own homes and using everyday equipment in their own homes instead of the gym equipment they would normally be using. Our Headroom Cafe has also created a virtual space. So the wellbeing menu that it would usually be running within the Headroom Cafe is now online. We have even held the open mic night via Zoom as well more recently. The carer support service is seeing a real increase in demand in terms of the stress that carers are under at the moment. They have put in place telephone support for everybody and increased the support needed for those who are currently struggling with the current situation. They also put their carers groups that would normally be run within the buildings online using video conferencing, and the peer carers support groups as well have continued to run during the pandemic. Jami's Compeer Befriending programme is going to be looking at matching volunteers and service users up virtually and by phone, so that when social distancing measures have been lifted, we can then connect people in person once they're able to. The social enterprises are Borehamwood Warehouse, the cafe and the Mill Hill shop have all had to close due to the lockdown. However, the vocation support services have continued to support people by phone and can carry out vocational assessments and support people to engage in courses and also job coaching and skills training. Some of the staff who work at our social enterprises have been redeployed to support the service team. And the Headroom Education programme has also been putting all of its services online and also responding to many other community organisations' need for education and support around mental health and wellbeing at the moment.
Thank you, Louise. As you can see from that, a huge amount has been going on, and there will be opportunities throughout the evening to ask questions, so please do ask whatever you want. To be able to facilitate all those things that Louise has been talking about required a huge effort from the staff team. And from the start, we had to redeploy everybody that normally wouldn't have been involved in frontline services to help support those services. So it really was a massive team effort. Right at the outset, we had to identify those people that were most at risk. At any one time, there were between 12 or 1,300 people using Jami services, and we very quickly knew that there was no way that we could respond individually to all of those. So very quickly, we did a risk assessment of those people and came up with approximately 350 people that needed it was very important that we stayed in contact with them as soon as possible. That contact varied from one-to-one telephone contact, delivering food, meals, and most importantly, doorstep chats that you heard about in the film. One of the key things, though, that we found and that we needed to identify is who actually had the facility to be able to engage with us online, because clearly everybody's talking about, post-COVID, it being a much more a digital world. Well, for a lot of the people using our services, they didn't have that skill set or that experience, or indeed the tech. So we very quickly supplied tablet computers and SIM cards, because for the vast majority of the people that we had to supply the IT to, they didn't have Wi-Fi or access to internet. And just to show how fast moving this all is, even the stat on the number of IT tablets that we supplied that was available in the film, we're already 40% up on that number. So things are changing very, very quickly. The purpose of this evening is really to give you information, and we felt the best way of doing that, as Adam said, is to allow you to answer questions, and hopefully we will answer as comprehensively as we can. So I think there's already some questions coming through. So Liz, do you want to share some of them with us?
I think, Laurie, before we get there, one of the things we were talking about before was, what do you think that we as a charity have learned in the way we've obviously changed the way we're delivering services, and going forward, what are the good bits? What are the positives that you think we'll be able to take?
I think one of the really positive things is, look, the concepts of physical distancing and isolation, we've spoke about these before, and clearly they're great weapons in the fight against COVID. But for a lot of people using our services, they've been isolated for years, and isolation really is not a great concept for people that are already experiencing poor mental health. But I think one of the things that hopefully we're going to really be able to do is, because we're helping to address that isolation, and the whole of the community is feeling some of that isolation, and resources are being put in place. Hopefully, as we come out of lockdown and as we come out of isolation, there is scope for everybody to move out of isolation together. So I think there will be some really positive stuff, and some of the the IT provision that we've done now has been really incredible and really enabling for people. Liz.
Have you seen an increase in referrals due to COVID? And if so, how are you coping with it?
Initially, it was an increase in referrals from the people using our services. And as for most statutory services, in the first days after the pandemic hit, there wasn't a huge spike in new referrals. But I think Louise is probably better placed than me to answer that question. So, Louise?
Yes, so initially across the board in mental health services, there was an initial sort of dip in referrals for services, but what we're likely to see and what's predicted quite soon is an increase in people accessing mental health services, and that's partly due to the direct impact of COVID-19, whether it's been people who have been unwell or suffered bereavement, all under what will be quite traumatic circumstances, but also the longer term impact of the measures that have been protecting us against the virus. So, we know that loss of routine, loss of role, financial implications, unemployment, loss of social contact, all have a negative impact on our mental health. And I think we're going to be needing to prepare for quite a long-term impact of those direct and indirect consequences of the virus.
Thank you. And clearly one of the challenges for all charities is our voluntary income, and for Jami that's particularly important because we're almost 100% voluntary funded, so we are completely reliant on our donors. So that's going to be really key. But we've got the double impact, that the concern and the uncertainty over funding, but also the fact that we're already experiencing increased demand on our services, and we're predicting more. So yes, the uncertainty over income, but there's something like we've assessed the cost even in this financial year to be upwards of £400,000, which is we're a £3 million charity, so an additional cost of £400,000 is clearly very significant, particularly in that uncertain funding climate.
A question is, when do you hope to open the hubs again, and will the provision look any different to how it looked pre-COVID?
A question that we're clearly asked an awful lot, particularly from the people that really rely on the hubs. It's going to be a combination of public health guidance, social care guidance, and the needs of the people using the hub. But again, if I could ask Lou maybe to give more of a comprehensive answer to that.
No, yeah, absolutely. We will be opening our buildings again, and we're very much looking forward to do so. But we need to do that quite cautiously, and we need to do that in a graded way as well. We need to have some sort of stability around the virus as well to make sure that we can kind of ease back into face-to-face services and keeping everybody safe and well whilst we do so. But I think one of the virtual programme and pathways that we're developing at the moment are not only essential during the pandemic, they have also been pathways and services that people have needed long before COVID-19, and that's something that we've really recognised, that there have been people who have been unable to engage in face-to-face services long before the pandemic. So we're very much committed to including and keeping and exploring how we work with those pathways and those platforms moving forward as well after lockdown measures have been lifted. So it will be, yes, we want to open up our buildings and get people back face-to-face, but we're not going to lose some of the really creative and innovative work that's happening now and making our services more accessible than they were before.
And just to add to the point that Lou's made, we're already seeing that not just are there some really effective interventions that we're able to deliver, even though we can't meet people face to face. We're already able to do a lot more for our money. So there's, even with the existing staff team, and I mentioned that we're going to have to add to that staff team quite significantly. But even with the existing team, we're already delivering upwards of 30% on the services that we were doing before. So I think there is going to be an opportunity that, much as we have to do more, that we're going to be able to offer more cost-effective delivery as well, which is really important. Again, particularly in this very, very uncertain and, as Adam said, unprecedented climate.
Have you already been asked to support other communal organisations, and how do you envisage that support to be delivered going forward?
Again, a really good question. As Louise said and spoke about in terms of referrals, one of the challenges is going to be in terms of the level of support that people need. So yes, for our existing service users and people that have used our services for a while, clearly we were going to look to meet their needs as soon as possible. But there's also another level of demand, which I will ask Louise to respond to, that is going to need almost a first stage approach. And we've already, some of you might be aware, in April, we'd already planned to launch it, but thankfully we brought it in slightly ahead of schedule, a digital platform for students that called Couth, and it gives various levels of support, moderated chat rooms, online counselling with real, it's a digital provision, but they're real counsellors that you're speaking with, and it's going to be able to address all sorts of issues. And what we've also done is that we're going to offer that from August. We hope it's going to be able to launch a very similar service, but for adults. And what we hope is, in the same way that we've been providing all sorts of business-to-business support to other communal organisations, we're going to be able to provide access to this online facility, almost in the vein of an employment assistance programme for the community. But Louise, I don't know if you've got anything to.
Yeah, a couple of things to add. I mean, certainly what was very clear very quickly was that our Head of Education team was responding to other organisations, as I mentioned before, and sort of working with organisations around how they can support the wellbeing and mental health of their staff and their constituents during the pandemic. So we've been responding and working with other organisations much more than we would normally during this time. But yeah, and as well, I think one of the other things that we need to recognise is we're going to be a lot of people who maybe haven't used social care organisations, haven't used mental health organisations, that are going to be presenting with issues. So as Laurie mentioned, Quell, the online counselling service, will be hopefully a really good resource for that, and also our new Compere friendship service as well, which is really sort of going to be able to utilise some of that communal organisations working together to support people to be connected and try and offset some of the challenges that they faced over the pandemic.
I mean, and just to add to Lou's point, it's been our vision, if you like, certainly our strategy over the last few years, that whatever great work Louise and her team do with those people using our services, unless the wider community understands mental health and can deal with mental health and recognise and just know how to talk to people and react, it's going to unravel an awful lot of the great work that people do using our services. So we've already been doing a lot of work with those organisations, but that's going to be even more important post-pandemic, to make sure that the whole community is better equipped to deal with its mental health.
I think the community really has come together in a number of initiatives, but both on the service delivery, and I've seen that we're certainly collaborating with a lot more of the community organisations, and of course fundraising, which is, and keep coming back to, but it's obviously very important, as all of us are looking at a gap between what we're bringing in and what we're going to have to do. And I think there's been some very responsible messages coming from some of the bigger charities, highlighting the fact that social care charities like ours are really going to need the support going forward. So there does seem to have been that feeling of community, and hopefully that will, as you say, will continue going forward.
Absolutely.
On that similar topic, a couple of questions here. how will COVID impact on Jami's budget? And one directed to you, Adam, specifically. As chair, are you worried about the future of the charity?
I suppose, I mean, taking that yes and no, I worry about the future of the charity on the basis that what we're looking at is a £3 million charity where we expect that there's going to be a reduction in the amount of voluntary contributions. We are 99% reliant upon voluntary donations to us. And I think when we look at what the pandemic will bring in its aftermath, how that will potentially lead to some really difficult financial positions for a number of people. Yes, I'm concerned about us raising the money, when at the same time, we're also going to see, as Lou and Laurie have said, a sort of long tail in terms of the effect this is going to have, particularly in people's mental health. So we're going to be stretched, but both ways. So I am concerned. Am I worried to the extent that we won't be able to cope? No. I think what we've shown so far, and again, I pay tribute to Laurie, Louise, and all of the team in their leadership, is that immediately, as soon as this happened, as soon as the Prime Minister came and made the announcement on Sunday night, later that night, we were already in a position where you had your team moving things around, changing the way, particularly for the kitchen, so that we could deliver hot food to people, and adapting. And I think one of the strengths that Jami's had throughout the time is that ability to be fairly nifty, fairly nimble by feet, and being able to move around, change, and get things done. So I'm worried about the challenges. They're going to be significant, and they're going to come at all angles. But I'm confident that, you know, with the team we've got in place, we've got some fantastic trustees who are supporting the work we're doing. I'm hoping that we'll be able to move forward. I also think that you know, mental health, which has been something which is being more and more talked about before the pandemic, but certainly it's very much now in the public eye that it's not just about the physical health, but mental health is something which the country and the community need to look after. So hopefully we are well prepared, we have the resources, but yes, it's going to be a challenge.
Thanks, Adam. And look, we always valued in our recruitment, whenever we're bringing people to Jami, a growth mindset in terms of people, and that has really proved huge value since the pandemic hit. The innovation, the creativity, the ability of people not to look for a playbook, but to respond to the needs of people, which is what we do every day. And those needs have changed, but it doesn't mean that the process by which we help support people with those increased needs changes. So I think the first question was about, you know, the budget. Ironically, we just signed off on the budget a week or two before the pandemic. We've obviously that's been completely reviewed and changed, and much as we've trimmed it back as far as we possibly could in an awful lot of areas, that has been replaced more so with the increased costs of the services that we need to deliver. And it's also on the income side, we've had to replace clearly our forecasts are very different than they were. Of
course, I mean, it's our voluntary donations, also the fact we've had the cafe shut now for 3 months. So, you know, it is a great challenge, and it's something we're going to have to look very carefully as we go forward.
Absolutely, but I think we're well placed, as Adam said, to respond to that. We've always been innovative and creative, and we could continue to do that. And just as an example of that, I'm very, very proud as an ex-software engineer. That's how I started my career. Quite ironically, we're now, if any of you that happen to read Computer Weekly, as of today, there's an article in Computer Weekly highlighting us, Jami, as a case study of how we have embraced technology in delivering our social care services in response to the pandemic. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we've done over this period that I think we would have wanted to do over the months and years ahead anyway, but there has been an opportunity under COVID to be able to move that bit quicker and facilitating some of these things. And as Louise said, we will absolutely make sure that where we can bring back face-to-face contact, where it's important, we will do that. But similarly, we're not going to go back, where there's some amazing digital interventions that we're offering, and geographically we can do them further afield, and we can just do it more effectively and to meet more demand. Louise, I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I think just to highlight what you were saying about us being able to use the digital platforms and the virtual spaces to be able to, really be more cost effective, because we're going to have increased demand, but we're also making sure that those are effective and supportive and meaningful for people. And we've had some of our OTs, peer support workers and social workers, adapting their practice, adapting their assessments, and then working with service users to see how that's going. So it's a really a testing phase at the moment of seeing how some of these interventions are working, and the feedback so far has been really good. So I'm confident that we are adapting, we are able to make sure that not only are we providing accessible services, but that we can continue to meet the demands that we're likely to see as well. And I think the other part of meeting that demand is, as we said earlier, community organisations working together, providing services like Quell, like Compare, that really meet the needs of the wider community, so that we can kind of hold that space together.
And there's some amazing examples just on a very specific level, which demonstrate, I think for me, very, very simply, the advantages of some of the interventions as they're now being delivered. So just to give an example, at the centre that we're in now, we have a training kitchen downstairs, and occupational therapists or peer support workers might help people learn some cooking skills. But now, of course, we're able to do that virtually, and we've given people tablet computers and we're checking in with them. And the outcomes of enabling someone and helping someone to cook in their own home, rather than learning and trying it out in an institutionalized setting and then taking it back to their home, it's far more productive. And so, yes, Louise, as a very experienced occupational therapist, of course knows that. But I think it's been really important for the organisation to actually be able to demonstrate how much more effective some of those interventions are. Some more questions.
On the subject of food, will the cafe in Golders Green be reopening, and what are Jami's plans about further cafes in the future, COVID permitting?
The cafe,
yes, the answer,
absolutely.
yeah,
the
good,
cafe
good.
In Golders Green will absolutely open.
When?
When is the question? I'm getting desperate because I promised the cafe staff just as we closed that I wouldn't have another cup of coffee until I had a cup of coffee in our cafe. So I'm desperate for it to open. But joking aside, similar to the answer that Louise gave earlier, it's not going to be driven. We are not a food and beverage operator. We've got a cafe because it is a sustainable way of delivering our services, because we bring in a significant income. But in the main, it's about destigmatizing mental health services and providing high street level access to services and really easy access to services. So we will be reopening when it's safe to do so, but the clear driver will be Louise and their team saying, this is where we really need that space, and what was going on in the cafe in terms of the mental health provision to recommence. But absolutely, we've got a commitment. We've got a commitment to open up more. There's a possibility that the high street is going to be a cheaper place going forward.
But I think that's the answer to the second part of that question. Yes, I mean, certainly, I would like us to open more, not because we're good at serving coffee, which we are, but because it's a great space, and it's a great space. It's a safe space, and we can deliver our services really well. So the answer, from me, hopefully, COVID permitting, budget permitting, it is absolutely yes. We'd love to open some more cafes.
The questions we're being asked at the moment are really around the positive aspects of COVID. So we've heard lots about the impact in terms of social isolation and people's failing mental health. But what's Jami really seen as a positive change resulting from COVID-19 crisis?
Louise, I don't know if you, that's not a complete kind of
That's what they do in the government, isn't it?
Louise, as my technical advisor, if you like.
I think across the board, I think, you know, people who have suffered with chronic illness, disability, have social care needs. I think we're all experiencing a little bit of what that might be like to have barriers to participating in our everyday activities. So I think there is something positive from there being a place of mutual support and a place of understanding. And I think that is something which I hope will continue that sort of path down destigmatizing people with illness and disability. I think, you know, for some people as well, although there is, you know, for some this impact of social isolation and the virus and everything that's going with that has exacerbated their mental health issues and their needs. But for others actually who struggle with going out, with engaging with work, school, public transport, for some people it's been a time of respite because there haven't been the same pressures to be doing the things that are causing stress and anxiety in every day. So it's really a kind of mixed thing there for people.
I think on a slightly sort of less on the services, but just more managing the charity, I think we're becoming more efficient as well. And the reality is an hour meeting takes an hour. It doesn't take half an hour to get there, 20 minutes to try and park. People generally aren't turning up late and stressed because they're running there. We're able to be efficient, and we're efficient with our time. We're able to include people wherever they are. And I think certainly we've seen from an organisational perspective, you know, some of the positives are that we are able to continue to operate in a fairly efficient way. Attendance at meetings has been very good. People haven't had places to go to, so it's been very good.
Absolutely. But just to follow on from one of Louise's points, she's absolutely right. For some people, there has been a respite in terms of not having to go out, not having those kind of social gatherings that possibly provoke some anxiety. But I think the challenge will be, as we come out, they're really going to resurface because people will then, and that will be then our challenge to help people, as I said, rise from isolation together and not then have this kind of polarization back to where we were, where the people that struggle to engage with society and the community still do, and the people that have kind of are thriving because we've come out of lockdown continue to thrive. So I think that will be a real challenge, but I think potentially, if managed correctly and supported correctly, that could be a real positive.
A lot of the work that we're doing now is preparing people for lockdown ending. So I know particularly some our young adults that are we're working with at the moment to prepare them, because that's a lot of the anxiety now is around measures being lifted. So we're already seeing that support is being picked up, and there's a lot of concern around sort of schools reopening, workplaces reopening. So we're kind of starting to sort of see that trend as well.
Thank you.
Do you think that the type of mental health issues we're currently seeing at Jami will change post-COVID? And if so, how will the services that Jami offers need to change to reflect that?
I think Louise has already answered some of that, but maybe she could expand on some of your previous answers.
I think one of the things that is predicted is that there will be a lot of sort of trauma-related issues that have come from people who've been impacted not only by the illness itself, but sort of bereavement as well. As I said before, these are traumatic circumstances to be bereaved and to be unwell in. So that's the prediction, is there are going to be some of those issues coming through, and also expected to see cases of anxiety, but also I think there's a lot around the situations that people will be finding themselves in. So we'll be looking at that sort of holistic view there around the person. I think in terms of preparing ourselves for it, I think these aren't issues that are new to us. These are issues that the service team work with on a daily basis. So I think it's just a case of being able to make sure that we are ready to meet that capacity really, and that demand for people that are coming through in the coming sort of weeks and months.
Absolutely. And we've referred to the uncertainty because of the economic climate in terms of our voluntary income, but clearly the economic climate will also impact on the mental health of the community as well. And as Louise said, there will be situations that present themselves because of that, unfortunately, the economic downturn that's already upon us, but is only going to get likely to get worse.
one thing I could just add to that actually is in terms
sorry,
of,
Louise, just wanted to add to.
sorry, yeah, just to add one of the things that we had already started to put in place actually before COVID-19, and that we have now committed to developing as a response more so, is our advocacy service. So we know that based, some of those situational issues that we just mentioned around financial situations particularly, we will be looking at, and also access to services and those kinds of issues. So we'll be looking at really making sure that we've got enough support in our advocacy team to be able to manage some of those issues.
Thank you. Sorry.
Is Jami involved in helping young people return to educational settings, schools and/or universities?
Sorry, Lou, over to you again. You're in place.
Yes, we very much are. As I said before, a lot of our young adults found that their experience, their mental health, their anxiety levels were reduced in the beginning during the lockdown measures. What we're seeing now, as I mentioned before, is that anxiety is rising. So we are doing a lot of work with them at the moment to prepare and to manage and to cope with coming out of this lockdown phase. But it's very much an issue for particularly our young adults at the moment, and some of our other vocational support services as well around returning to work.
One point I would make, and it's not a pleasant topic, but there's a lot of areas in mental health that are not pleasant. But I'd like Louise just to fill it a little bit, because there was an earlier question about the work that we're doing with other organisations, and I think over recent months, certainly it happened just before COVID. One of the best collaborations we've been involved with recently is the post-vention piece that we did with schools, and we're being approached by other organisations to share those resources. But Louise, could you perhaps explain to people here what that piece of work is?
Yeah, so it's a response to the event of a suicidal traumatic death in a school in particular. So with Grief Encounter, Jewish Bereavement Service, Norwood and Jami, we've come together to create a document and advice and guidance for schools to be able to deal with the after effects of suicide. We know that the ripple effect of suicide is really, really huge, and it's really important that this is dealt with in a sensitive way. So we are training up first responders. There's already been the first group of first responders have been through their training and are ready and on standby to support schools. And there's going to be some further training coming up. So they would be then on a rota and working within a school. We've currently got it so that if there is any need, and we hope there isn't, but if there is any need for us to step in at this point, we'll be able to hold a virtual space to do that. So we've prepared for that. But this is a document and a training program that we are looking to share quite widely.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Following on from a focus on young people, are there any particular age groups that we see experiencing greater pressures on mental health than others? And does Jami have examples of where they're working in other social care settings to support, for example, care homes?
I'll let Louise answer in a second, but certainly because she's got more access to the actual live data. But for me, one of the key areas that I think are, we don't like using labels, we don't like using diagnoses at Jami. But one of the diagnoses, one of the labels that people quite often use is elderly, is to be old. And unfortunately, I think one of the things that's happened since COVID, and particularly with the government announcement that if you're over 70, you have to shield. For me, the 70 to 85 age group is potentially really, really vulnerable, because in the main they've been really active, and they were very active pre-lockdown, and yet they've been told to shut in, and they're generally not working from home. Quite often they might be living on their own, but they're more used to being out and about and having social contact, arguably, than an awful lot of other people. So I think that's a group that is particularly vulnerable. Indeed, we're having conversations with Jewish Care about how we can support that very group, because that's a group that Some of them may have been using Jewish care community centres, for example, but obviously those community centres are closed as well. So what we're looking to do is whether or not there is scope to provide access to some of our online cafe groups and cafe resources that are going on, and to tailor them specifically to that age group. But Louise, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I think in terms of, you know, trends around our referrals, and what's been slightly different over the last few months is we would normally have seen an increase in referrals for our sort of 18 to 25 age group at this time, which, as I mentioned earlier, isn't what we've seen. We've actually seen there's been, you know, we're now seeing a pickup in distress around that age group now, which is a little bit later. But we have seen, as Laurie said, we've seen an increase in our over 75s over this pandemic. That's been the sort of biggest increase of people who have been coming to our services during the last couple of months. Because, you know, I think the trouble is a lot of people who are already connected to other social groups and other networks, those have been taken away. So Jami's been a service that's continued to run. In fact, if anything, services have become more accessible over the last couple of months than they even were before. But we've really seen the impact of people whose other services have reduced or declined, and that's been a real impact. And in terms of working with other organisations, you know, that's so important. It's important that we are signposting for that person, or if someone else comes to us and are working with other organisations, that we would want to make sure that we're joined up and working for the benefit of the person.
Thank you. Adam did say earlier that one of the beauties of the digital world is you can be much more effective and stick to time. And I'm going to apologise now because I know there's quite a few questions that have been posted. But Liz, if we could perhaps have that one last question.
What can the wider community do to support the mental health of its constituents, and what can Jami do to support the wider community?
I'm not going to just throw this over to Louise, but I'm going to let Louise answer first, and then I'll respond.
I think you know, it's really simple stuff when it comes to what we can do to connect with each other, to make sure that people are connected is so vital. I think it's only through connecting and talking to each other that we can really unpick maybe what the issues are, and then signposting people to support and help. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, if one positive aspect of this pandemic has been is the fact there is a sense of mutual support. There's a bit of a more mutual understanding of what it might be like to have your life impacted on by an illness or disability. So I think for me, the message is to when we're out of lockdown, when things go back to whatever normal looks like after the pandemic, I think it's really important that as a community we remember what this experience has been like, because it may have given us a bit of a taste of what it might be like for people who on a daily basis struggle to get to the supermarket with anxiety, or who are struggling to engage in their everyday activities, or who are struggling because of financial issues or whatever else, struggling to leave their house. So I think for me it's really about having a bit of a deeper understanding of people's experiences, and being able to sort of again reduce that stigma discrimination, which I think we've already come so far in doing, but I think there's a bit of a way to go. So I think that would be my message to the community.
Thank you. And to add to what Louise said, for me it's the potential to accelerate what's already gone on before. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. We're all getting a dose of isolation and real uncertainty. And I think, as an example, I was doing a doorstep delivery. I think I delivered in a tablet computer and a meal, and had a chat with somebody on 5th floor of a tower block in East London. And it's almost with trepidation that at the moment you say to someone, how are you doing? And quite surprisingly, the lady I was delivering to threw it back at me, and she said, Laurie, how are you feeling? And I shared. I was very honest. I said, well, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling uncertain. I'm feeling worried. And she said, I've been feeling like that for 35 years. And I think there's something about us all. We all like to feel that we're empathetic, and that we can have meaningful conversations with people without necessarily really understanding where someone's come from. And I think hopefully my message would be that we're going to be in a better place to have those kind of conversations. And we need to be better informed, we need to be better educated. And so a lot of the work that we do is about educating the community so that it doesn't always have to be a Jami member of staff that has that conversation, that provides that support. There are so many networks out there through the pandemic that are delivering food, that are having these chats, that are trying to reduce people's isolation. Now, there's an amazing capacity, a social capital, if you like, in the community to do that. And if we can just lever that up as we come out of the pandemic, I think the future really will be bright.
Thanks, Laurie. And thanks, Louise. And I think, if anything, what sticks with me about that last question and the community is that what we need to do is come out of this as a community. We need to come out of this together. And I think that is something which people will have a much deeper understanding. But many of us, as you say, have felt anxious, have felt things that for us have been very different, but for many people, as you say, live with it day in, day out. Thank you again for all that you're doing. Thank you for the team here, in particular to Liz and Muriel tonight, who have helped to put this event on. And may I also, we've talked about how we now are becoming far more reliant on tech in order to communicate with everybody. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank our friends at Uptown Events who have helped us put tonight on and made it possible for all of us to join together. So I wish all of you very well. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for attending tonight, for your continued support, and very much hope to see you all soon, hopefully in one of our hubs or in the cafe. But if not, again, via Zoom, via Facebook, we will make sure we do keep in touch. Thank you all very much and have a good evening.